That's just the way that human beings work.
Previously on David Decero. Check out his channel, he's dope.
I feel as if what I do isn't any good, and I find myself kind of wondering whether I'm wasting my time writing at all. And it gets very deep very quickly.
That was part one. Check it out on his channel. Let me ask you a question. Are you a writer looking to improve? Another question. Are you a plot-based or a character-based writer? Unrelated question. Are your books predictable, or do your readers never see it coming? This video might tell you why it is. There are so many gems in this video. Use the timestamps if you have to. Like, comment, and subscribe, yada yada yada. Let's go.
If there were one book for craft that I could recommend, like, what would it be? And there are two ways that I can answer this. The first one is a book that spells out, like, so this is what you need to know in order to improve your craft as a writer. And that would be a handbook on writing. The second is a book that I might give to a writer, and it's the work of another writer, like, let's say a novel, or let's say a book of poems or something like that. And would this, let's say, improve a writer's craft? As a creative writing teacher, oftentimes I find myself giving a writer the work of another writer and then saying something like, your work seems to be trying to do this. Now, here's the work of another author, let's say, is trying to do something like what you're trying to do. Maybe you might be able to learn something from the way that this writer does it. Why? Sometimes I'm trying to help a writer with the way that they write prose. So to answer your question, is there one book that I would offer around craft? No, there isn't. And that's because every author, I would probably offer a different booktube tailored to what they might be trying to work on in their art. It's kind of like a doctor prescribing something. You don't prescribe one thing to every patient. No, you don't. They're all experiencing different things.
Why did you suggest that I read Hemingway?
Yes, Hemingway writes prose where it seems as if things are described very objectively. Things just happen. And there's a kind of like a very like masculine prose. And even as I say it, I'm kind of like, ooh, you know. But the thing is that it's like the reason why it's masculine is because it's kind of macho. It's this macho prose in which you don't really
experience the feelings of the characters
or something like that. It's like they just
do things.
Or let's say writers who write things to explore the interiorities of their characters, you know, a lot of inner dialogue. I might put Hemingway into their hands as a way to say, like, okay, look at how this writer invites the reader to guess, to fill in the blanks of what these characters might be feeling. And I think that there can be immense pleasure for readers to attempt to have the pleasure of being able to say, like, okay, how is this character feeling?
To co-create.
It's like, yeah, exactly. It becomes this co-creative process in which it's like, wow, I think this character might be feeling like tremendous anguish, but they're kind of pushing it down, you know, for example. And restraint is one of the ways in which I might characterize Hemingway's prose. That's one of the reasons why I might put Hemingway in as a kind of like, oh, look at how this writer does it.
That's one. And two, you were going to say something about Joseph Campbell and that approach of multiple cultures from different places having the same story to tell.
Okay, there are a lot of people out there who love Joseph Campbell. Okay, I'm gonna get like completely dorky for a second. Okay, there was this thing called structural linguistics, and it was an approach to thinking about language and linguistics in which it's all about these blocks. Let's say you're laying out blocks as if you're like building a wall. One of the things that became very hot was thinking about folk tales from different cultures, where it's kind of like, okay, here's the block in which somebody leaves their village or something like that. Here is the block in which somebody gets like a glass slipper or fur slipper, like I'm talking about Cinderella, of course, you know, and like, here's the thing with the relatives, like the evil stepsisters or something like that, and they mess things up and all this kind of stuff. Okay, so one of the folks in anthropology, who's named Claude Lévi-Strauss, actually had this approach where he was trying to train other people to kind of think in this way. And he would say something like, okay, you take these index cards and you kind of like, you stick it on the wall, put them together, build it out, and this becomes like a template. You can see how it's in this culture, it's in that culture, it's in this culture, it's in that culture. And what it is, it's like a master key. It's like the skeleton key that unlocks all of culture or unlocks all of literature or unlocks all of language, you know? There's something like very seductive about that. This idea that you finally discovered the key for everything. It puts a lot of power in the hands of the critic to be able to make these pronouncements about everything kind of like being reducible to this blueprint, to this master paper document. There are ways in which it doesn't work if you look at it closely enough. What it doesn't deal with very well is exceptions, things that don't fit that plan. It's very reductive. It's something that is a bit too clean. For me as a critic, that's one of the reasons why I have a beef with Joseph Campbell.
I agree with you when you say that. How The Hero with a Thousand Faces improved me as a writer and a book reader. It affected me in the way that I started seeing through a lot of plot-based books. I can start reading a book and just from the tone, I can just start predicting things, and I'm 75% of the time I'm right. It's why I just became so inclined towards reading character-based story. If I read a book with a plot and I can't predict it, I'm like, this writer is a genius. So that's how it affected me as a reader. As a writer, the idea of that, right, I kind of took it as a challenge. But I'm conscious of it, so I'm subconsciously not doing things the way they are supposed to be. And that took my writing to another level. Me suggesting him to read it might not affect him in the same way, even if he wants to be a plot-based writer, to help him mask his plot.
First off, that there might be this difference between you as a writer and you as a reader. You know, the reader might find these ideas of Joseph Campbell's as seductive, but then as a writer, you find yourself taking it as a dare. You know, it's kind of like, okay, how can I break this? You know? I love it. I love it because it's like, that's a kind of agency. Of course it should be a challenge. You know, it's kind of like, am I doomed to write this story the way that, like, you know, through time, because
That's just the way that human beings work.
no. And I think that sense of challenge it should be animating. It should be something that drives you. Somebody presents me with this pen that I'm supposed to stay in, so I'm going to break it. It should be energy for us to be able to, like, you know, break out of it and all this kind of stuff. But genre, and when I say genre, I mean the norms and expectations around what counts as a novel, what counts as poetry, what counts as a play. Those are things that we can always play with. If we play a bit too hard with them, then people might get confused, might get alienated, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I absolutely wouldn't boil it down to something like,
Well, these are unchangeable things about like human psychology and like all this.
going back to what David was saying, you know, it's like, this doesn't have to be like an absolutely neat circuit. Like, we can absolutely push and pull on the different sides of us as writers and readers.
What you just said now made me think of how important it is, again, for people just to read and understand the norms of a genre, or even the hero structure is used by so many stories. That's what it seems like Joseph Campbell's book is based on. Just even knowing that construct, if you learn it and know it well, you know how to just tweak one little thing. It's like, once you know the rules, then you can better know how to break them and make something that is a little more interesting or a little different.
That's the value of that book. Everyone is trying to mask their plot. Every writer is trying to do that. He gives several examples of how they are doing the same thing, but it's masked. I got a headache reading that book. After that, plot-based books became so predictable, except like you were writing on another level.
There is a book that screenwriters love called Story. Story, as I understand it, was very influenced by this kind of approach. Story became this book that was very influential for the way that people structure their screenplays. And so one of the things that is absolutely amazing to me is how very, very, very structured screenplays can be. At X amount of minutes, you can expect this kind of thing to happen, you know, like this kind of part of the arc of things. And that to me is mind-blowing. But then I think about how something like this could make sense within the movie industry, where it becomes incredibly complicated and expensive, perhaps, to have a story that doesn't conform, you know, to something that is a very expensive production process. And having that kind of framework, that kind of like skeleton on which to lay something, helps grease the wheels, I guess, around the movie production process or the TV production process. If you're writing a novel, you're not necessarily beholden to this kind of thing. If you're writing a book of poetry, you're probably definitely not. I would say that in that industry, it's become immensely influential.
Yeah, I've read that one. I think it's by Robert McKee. It's a really interesting book, and it totally breaks things down piece by piece. And then a lot of times, just like you said, you could be sitting there and watching a movie and be like, oh, that's the midpoint right there. Okay, here they go from reactive to active, and okay, here comes the climax, and you can just kind of, here it goes.
It's like clockwork.
Yeah.
Like those books, man, I'm not reading that book, man. It really reading for me.
Like, comment, and subscribe, yada yada yada. Read Create Love Chaos, join the Discord, join me on Instagram, join me on TikTok. Stay epic and peace.
Do it!